So in the textbook, there is a marker of really Western Europe, and then discussing a little bit of the Eastern part of Europe. And of course, we're talking about Western civilization. And um, Russia, to this day, it holds itself almost in a kind of its own place. On one hand, it's a part of European. Uh, it's a part of the Western tradition in many ways. And the others, it is much more on the Eastern. And when it comes to geopolitics, Russia has almost always been on the outs in regards to relations with the Western counterparts, regardless of the ideology. So, um, in recent history, communism, Russia versus the West, um, was seen as the main uh, issue. Communism. But if you look, and we'll cover this later on down the line in the class, um, Britain, and France in the 19th century would unify on behalf of the Turks of the Ottoman Empire, siding with Muslims at the expense of Russia just to keep Russia weaker. And, this has just been a trend. And at the same time, Russia has really seen itself for a long time as the holding the torch of true Christianity and many values that the West actually has as well. And so, in this complication, I think that if you look at this history, it helps explain kind of where things are at now, and it makes you realize that the issues with Putin and the Ukraine and the things that you're seeing have a history and a context that the Russians seem to be more aware of as a whole than, let's say, Americans. And I can't speak for Western Europeans. I'm not really quite sure of their thought on this. But I kind of want you to keep in mind thinking about current political conflicts and then just kind of looking back at this. And I'm just going to narrow in and discuss even Ivan Grozny, or Ivan the Terrible, as an emphasis on this. In any case, I just wanted to mention where Russia even gets into having mainly a Christian background. Of course, in Russia there exist many Muslims as well to this day. But it's in the 10th century that they convert to Christianity. Kievian Rus was actually Kiev appears to have been founded by Swedish Vikings that were called the Rus, which the name of the country gets now. That quickly became went from being a Germanic people intermarrying and taking on Slavic culture to the point that's like a kind of forgotten history almost. And then at some point there was the issue of the dominant religions of the time were Islam and Christianity, and Russians picked Christianity. Okay, but here's what happens. Actually, I'm gonna go back just to clarify, and this kind of helps actually clarify a lot. Here's the Byzantine Empire, something that we went into detail in Western Civ 104. That was the eastern part of the Roman Empire that claimed to be a part of the legacy of Rome. Constantinople is named after Constantine, but it's Greek speaking, not Latin. And eventually the church there and the Western Church of Rome are going to not be in communion anymore. They're going to break away eventually. And it's missionaries from the Byzantine world that are going to convert Russians. So the Christianity that you see that comes out of Russia obviously is coming from a more of a Greco-Roman tradition, okay, that comes out of the former Eastern Empire of Rome, okay. Anyways, so then something else happens that puts Russia on the outs with the rest of the West, just by default, not like by force. It's the Mongol conquests of Eurasia in the 13th up to the 15th centuries. So Mongol conquests further isolate Russia from the Western world, and they are subjected to tribute, not direct rule. So Russian society develops itself without being imposed by the Mongols, but they are restricted, kind of cut off in many ways. And this isolation is also going to give Russia a much more insular look at itself. It's not going to be in long contact with its other Christian world counterparts. And I think that it's fair to say it's going to shape a certain identity that Russia takes that is further unique and kind of out of the box when it comes to the Western world. Okay, and so also in that time from Kiev we see the rise of Moscow, and in the 14th century, Moscow emerges as a leading city and headquarters of the Russian Orthodox Church. And so with the rise of Moscow, the Kremlin is going to be built in the 14th century and develop further in the 1400s. And then it is going to just keep, Moscow is going to continue to expand. Okay. Now, Ivan the Great, Grand Prince, around the 15th to early 16th century, he took on the Mongols. He married the niece of the last Byzantine emperor, and then he called himself Tsar. Now, this is also important. Tsar, and many of you have heard this, the Russian Tsar, is the Russian word for Caesar. So Russians are like the Byzantine emperors who saw themselves as preserving the legacy of Rome, though Greek-speaking Roman identity. Okay, if you have any questions on that, you're going to have to ask me. It's a little bit take some time to explain, but ultimately, just as Constantine, as Charlemagne, the Germanic ruler, is going to get crowned and claimed to be taking on the legacy of Rome. Here we see a Russian, a Slav, putting on a crown, basically saying, I'm taking on this legacy of Rome as well. Okay, and here again, this is where, even though Russia is in the east, it's still a part of that Western legacy, the Western Mediterranean legacy of the Roman world, the Greco-Roman world, but in its own very distinct way. They're able to gain independence from the Mongols in the 15th century, 1480, and he tripled the territory of his state. So this is what makes him significant. Now, in the textbook, it talked about a third Rome, the concept that Russia had. So here's what a monk's concept of the third Rome was. And I think that this kind of gives you an understanding about what was going to be evolving into what Russia is, a sense of itself. So I'll read this really quick. It said, heresy caused the downfall of old Rome. The Turks used their axes to shatter the doors of all churches in 1453 of the second Rome, the city of Constantinople. In other words, he's talking about Western Rome fell. He said it because of heresy. He says then the eastern part, the Byzantine Empire, falls from the Muslims, the Turks. Now in Moscow, the third Rome, the holy ecumenical apostolic church of your sovereign state, shines brighter than the sun in the universal Orthodox Christian faith throughout the world. Pious Tsar, let people of your state know that all states of the Orthodox faith have now merged into one, your state. You are the only true Christian ruler under the sky. I repeat here what I have written above. Pious Tsar, listen and remember that all Christian kingdoms have now merged into one, your Tsardom. 2 Romes have fallen, the third stands firm, and there will not be a fourth. No one will replace your Christian Tsardom. So, here you can see then, wow, this is the kind of identity that through this isolation is going to emerge a Russian sense of being the sole preservers of true religion, thought, truth of God, the true church, and maintaining the Roman legacy. Okay, and I think that's missed on a lot of observers of that kind of concept that comes out of um, a kind of orthodoxy in view of a conservative Russian notion of itself. Okay, and I think we have to be careful to read these things and not just assume this is how all Russians, think of themselves, or even religious Russians. But that legacy is there, and it does explain a lot. I'm going to end this here and continue on to the next lecture on this topic.